You put months of work into growing your plants, so don't let all that go to waste with weak-smelling, bad-tasting buds. Today, I'll show you 3 tricks to boost your cannabis flavor and aroma. Come on, but before we do, today's video is brought to you by Real Growers Recharge. If you want stronger, healthier plants, if you want bigger roots for better fruits, you gotta check out Real Growers Recharge. It's like an instant compost tea that holds more nutrients at your root zone, breaks those nutrients down, and makes them more plant available, getting more of your nutrients into your plants. Find out more about Recharge over at realgrowers.com. And while you're there, use coupon code Scotty420 to get 20% off your first order. Now let's get back to the show. On High C, let's talk about growing some great smelling, great tasting cannabis.
Okay, so you do that. You've always got really good smelling, great tasting cannabis.
Yep.
But you're not as much of a strain person. You don't really freak out about the strains.
Right.
Hanging around with you, I've noticed that strain matters, but there's other things that matter more.
Very much so. Very much so. Come on, we'll get into them. I got 3.
Okay, so let's jump into the first one and talk about developing that great aroma and great taste in the first place.
So it all starts with the terpenes, right? Terpenes will give you your flavor, your aroma, and terpenes are just a combination of hydrogen and carbon, just different combinations of those. It's the nutrients that are going to help us assemble them.
Okay, and the terpenes, I've heard of like limonene or limonene.
Sure.
There's these different types of terpenes, and that's where the smell and the flavor comes from?
Absolutely, and all our nutrients just facilitate assembling them. I thought they were super complicated back in the day. They're just combinations of hydrogen and carbon atoms. So carbon from the air, hydrogen from the water. So all the nutrients do is facilitate the assembly of them. So we want to make sure that we're assembling them as aggressively as possible.
Okay, so the hydrogen, the water, they turn into the terpenes, but then there's other things that you can add into your mix that help them better facilitate that transformation?
All right, come on. You know I'm going to start with something in Recharge. Let's do beneficial bacteria.
Okay, let's talk about it.
Yeah, it induces a response. Remember we were talking about that induced systemic resistance that it promotes? Well, bacteria do that. They give a little bit of stress, just a little bit. It's enough to induce a stress response. It says, hey, I better make more terpenes.
Oh, because you've told me this before. Terpenes are kind of like a protective layer that the plant produces.
Sure.
Makes them less appealing to certain bugs, helps protect against UV. So giving them a little bit of stress at the microbial, bacterial level will also induce that?
Just the right type of stress. I can humanize it, you know? You ever meet someone that's never had any stress in their life?
They're weak.
Yes. You ever meet somebody that's stressed out all the time?
Well, they're kind of also
They're a
weak.
mess. Yeah, but the right amount of stress will build a big, strong, resilient person, right?
Yeah, okay, I get it. Okay, metabolites and enzymes, do they have anything to play in this role?
Yeah, they're assembled. Remember we said the terpenes are just hydrogen and carbon? Well, they have to be assembled. So to be assembled, it needs enzymes. It needs the nutrients to make everything move around or help everything move around. Sure. So that's where the enzymes come into play, and that's where the microbes stimulate enzyme production.
Gotcha. Okay. Specifically, this is one that you always talk. You say mycorrhizae. It's so sexy. How does mycorrhizae play a role in terpene production?
It just holds more. It holds all of those nutrients, so they are immediately plant available. So when those enzymes send that signal, hey, we need to build some terpenes. I need to move some nutrients around. I need some nitrogen. I need some phosphorus to facilitate. I need some sulfur to facilitate all that movement and all that assembly. That's where they come into play. So when you have those immediately plant available, when they're just in reserve at the root zone, ready to be uptaken, yeah, you just get more terpenes built.
Okay, so that's a big key of why having a microbe mix like Recharge in your soil at your root zone helps produce those more terpier plants.
Right. Don't make me say amino acids.
Okay, amino acids. What's up there?
They just help build the terpenes as well. They facilitate the assembly. I told you it was carbon and hydrogen is all they are, but they have to be assembled. They have to be, some have 16 carbons and 24 hydrogens. It all needs to be put together. And that's where the enzymes and the nutrients come into play. And the amino acids are building those enzymes.
And this is all happening while the plant is in flower. This isn't like I've noticed on your plants,
Sure.
it'll still be 2-3 weeks before you're ready to chop them, and they're already just covered in frost sometimes.
Oh, yeah, and they're still building. Absolutely. You want these things building to the last, I don't know, maybe the last 10 days or so. Those trichomes should be still beefing up. And that's enzymatic action that's doing that.
Okay, so we talked about how to grow plants while they're growing,
Sure.
how to get that extra terpene, extra trichome-rich plants.
Yep.
What about once you've harvested? How do you keep all of that hard work intact?
You got to keep the terpenes and cannabinoids inside that trichome head, and just realize that terpenes volatilize off, meaning they go right from a solid to a gas. They skip the liquid phase, and when they do that in heat. So I tell you what, temperature and humidity is if we're talking about it, the last 10 days of your grow or the last bit of your grow, you need to have your temperature and humidity in check, or you're going to be making those terpenes and volatilizing them off at the same time.
Oh, so they'll be volatilizing off before you even go into harvest.
Absolutely. When you go into a grow and you smell, the terpenes, and you're not smelling magic, they're volatilizing off into the air, and you're smelling that.
So you're losing that potency.
Yes. So we want to reduce that as much as possible while growing. And then certainly once we harvest and dry it, right?
So let's talk about the
Sure.
environment first in the end part of your bloom,
Sure.
and then when you're actually harvesting. What am I looking for?
You don't want it to be too high of a temperature. For me, I'm in the mid 70s. I think I'm at 74 degrees Fahrenheit, and then somewhere in the 50% humidity range, right around there.
And then when you go to harvest?
When I go to harvest, then I want to throw it in a drying tent. And, the rule of thumb is 60 degrees, 60% humidity.
Oh.
We're being real here. I'm not going to be able to keep this room at 60 degrees the whole time. I keep it cooler. It's 64, 65 in here. I keep my humidity right at about 60%. I'm able to control that pretty well. I use a grow tent. And it takes, 7 to 10 days, I would say, right around 7 days. Anything over 5 days, you're giving, what's happening when you're slowly drying is the plant's still alive. It still has some moisture in there, and you're able to start converting the chlorophyll. There's chlorophyllase. That's the enzyme that breaks down chlorophyll. We need some moisture to keep going. So as long as you have some moisture in there, that enzyme can slowly break down the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll's that's the green stuff. People will be like, oh, it's got a green taste to it.
Yeah.
Chlorophyll hasn't broken down yet.
Okay, so I've made the mistake of smoking cannabis that was dried in like 3 days, 5 days.
It's dried in the car, man, on the dashboard.
Right. And it looked great,
Yeah.
and it didn't smell great, but I knew it came from a good strain.
Yep.
But it definitely tasted like hay almost.
Yeah, you got to let that chlorophyll break down. It's it's an enzymatic thing. It takes a few days.
So you want a time, you don't want it to dry too fast, because even though it'll be smokable, it'll still have all that chloroform.
No, chlorophyll. Chloroform's a little different, man.
Okay. Don't want to be smoking that either.
No.
So you want to time it out to where as it dries, it's kind of matching up with breaking down that chlorophyll, and that also helps improve the taste.
Huge.
Or at least gets rid of that grassy taste.
It's a huge improvement in the taste. And I'll try to, sometimes things don't go perfectly. It'll dry 7 days. So what I'll do is I'll take it and I'll leave it mostly on the stem, because there's a bunch of moisture in the stem. By the way, when I try to dry with big giant stems so that it keeps a bunch of moisture in there and dries a bit slower.
Okay, slow down the dry a little bit.
Yeah, but then when it's getting close, and I do the joint test, I'll grind something up and I'll take a look and I'll be like, all right, this will barely burn in a joint. It'll burn, but it'll keep going out. It'll give me black ash. That's when it's time to throw it in. I have a 5-gallon bucket. Most people throw it in like a quart mason jar, and then they call it that's when they call it curing and burping. So
That's just like the final touch.
yeah, you're putting the final finishing touches on. If I leave it in my grow closet too long, or my drying closet too long, it might get crispy. Just here, if you're in a jar, it pulls a little bit of the moisture out, then you can release it. Sometimes they'd say once or twice a day, you'd open the jar. They call it burping the jar. You leave it open for 10 minutes or so. And that's getting into, they call that curing. And that's like the slow breakdown of the rest of that chlorophyll. And as it cures more up to a point, it gets really smooth and mellow.
Okay, and then you mentioned only keeping your jar open for about 10 minutes or your bucket open for about 10 minutes. I've heard you use the term terp burglar before. What's that?
Yeah, if you leave the jar totally off, the lid of the jar totally off, you're going to let all those terpenes evaporate. You're also going to let all that moisture evaporate. Remember, we need moisture to keep that enzymatic breakdown going. Yeah, so if it's too dry, you're just stopping everything, and yeah, you're going to get much less quality.
Gotcha. Okay, man. So from when we're growing it, when we're having it flower, when we're harvesting it, and then all the way up into how we're storing it, all of these have an impact on the flavor and aroma of that cannabis you grew.
It makes sense, right? I mean, the terpenes are these little balls of cannabinoids and terpenes, all sorts of, valuable chemicals are in there. We want to preserve them. It makes sense that when you volatilize them, when you vaporize them, when you smoke them, they go away, right? They go into the air. They're volatilized off. So we want to keep that from happening in our grow, in our drying area. We want to wait and have that happen when we're actually inhaling.
So basically produce them, protect them, and then give it time to get rid of that chlorophyll at the end.
Produce them, protect them, preserve them.
There we go.
Hey, but those are just my tips for growing the most flavorful, terpene-rich bud that I can. But what about you? You got any great tips? Share them in the comments. And if you dug this video, hit that like button. Smash that subscribe button. Talk about this video with another grower you know. And check out the other couple videos YouTube's recommended. I sure hope you'll dig them.